From beyond the veil of the Force, infinite paths stretch before us. Choices made and unmade, destinies fulfilled and averted. Today, we explore one such path. What if Anakin Skywalker never burned on Mustafar? What if he emerged from that volcanic crucible not broken and imprisoned by armor, but whole, unbroken, and far more dangerous than the galaxy ever imagined? The crimson blade carved through the sulfurous air of Mustafar, each swing more calculated than the last. Anakin Skywalker, no. Darth Vader now moved with a precision that contradicted the rage burning in his yellow-tinged eyes. Across the platform, Obi-Wan Kenobi deflected another strike, his blue lightsaber trembling slightly in his grip. This wasn't the impulsive Padawan he trained. This was something else entirely. "I have failed you, Anakin," Obi-Wan said, his voice breaking as their blades locked. "I have failed you. I should have known the Jedi were plotting to take over," Vader snarled, but there was something different in his delivery. Where there should have been mindless fury, there was cold certainty. He'd made his choice on the path to the temple. Every step since has been deliberate. They fought their way across the facility, a deadly dance between brothers who knew each other's every move. But as the battle progressed, something shifted. Vader wasn't losing himself to emotion. He was channeling it, weaponizing it. When they reached the collection arm extending over the lava river, Obi-Wan made his play. He leapt to the high ground, his robe singed, but his stance firm. "It's over, Anakin," he declared, though his voice wavered with the weight of what he knew must come next. "I have the high ground!" In the original timeline, and the reality we know, this is where Anakin's arrogance would doom him. One desperate hate-fueled leap. Obi-Wan's blade slicing through limbs. The scream. The burning. The transformation into the armored nightmare that would haunt the galaxy. But not here. Vader stared up at his former master, and for a moment, calculation replaced rage. He'd felt Palpatine's teachings clicking into place throughout the duel. Patience. Efficiency. The Sith way of exploiting every advantage. The high ground meant nothing if you could simply remove it. Without warning, Vader extended his hand and pulled with the Force. Not at Obi-Wan directly, but at the structure beneath him. The metallic groan echoed across Mustafar as the platform buckled. Obi-Wan stumbled, his concentration broken for just a heartbeat. That was all Vader needed. The red blade was already in motion as Obi-Wan fell. It didn't sever limbs. Vader was too controlled for that now. But it carved a burning line across Obi-Wan's back, sending him sprawling onto the blackened ground. His lightsaber clattered away, deactivating as it fell. Vader stood over him, blade humming. One strike. That's all it would take. But as he looked down at the man who'd raised him, taught him, believed in him, something stayed his hand. Not mercy, not love, certainty. "You are broken, old man," Vader said, his voice eerily calm. "I want you to live with what you've seen, what you couldn't stop. When the Jedi are nothing but memory, you'll know you survived to witness it." He turned away, leaving Obi-Wan gasping on the scorched earth, alive but utterly defeated. There would be no dramatic falling into lava, no burning, no need for the armor that would have both sustained and imprisoned him. Vader walked back through the facility, unscathed except for superficial burns from the ambient heat. His stride was confident, purposeful. He'd proven something to himself in that moment of restraint. He wasn't a slave to his anger anymore. He was its master. Enjoying our alternative Star Wars universe? Consider liking and hitting the hype button to show us your support. Don't forget to subscribe for more mind-bending tales from the Star Wars universe. When Palpatine's shuttle descended through the ash and ember, the Emperor stepped out, expecting tragedy. He'd felt the conflict through their bond, the rise and fall of dark side energy. He'd come prepared to find his new apprentice broken, burned, clinging to life by the tiniest thread, ready to be remade into the cyborg enforcer he'd envisioned. Instead, he found perfection Vader knelt before him on both knees, his breathing unobstructed, his body whole. The yellow of his eyes burned bright in the volcanic twilight. "Master," Vader said, "it is done." For perhaps the first time in decades, Palpatine felt something he thought he'd purged from his being: surprise. His plan had accounted for Vader's destruction and reconstruction. The armor was to be both punishment and a leash, a constant reminder of failure, a limitation that would keep the apprentice subordinate. The rule of two demanded that the apprentice eventually overthrow the master. But Palpatine had engineered events to postpone that inevitability indefinitely. Now, looking at his apprentice, unburned, unbroken, and radiating dark side power, Sidious had to recalculate everything. "Rise, Lord Vader," he said, his voice betraying none of his thoughts. "You have done well." As they boarded the shuttle, Palpatine's mind raced. Perhaps this was better. Perhaps a Vader who had conquered his impulsiveness, who had chosen power over sentiment in the crucible of Mustafar, would be an even more devastating instrument. The galaxy would fear a Sith Lord they could see, one who looked human even as he acted as a monster. But the Emperor also understood what many would not. The armor he'd prepared wasn't just mechanical, it was psychological. It was a constant reminder of failure, a prison of pain that kept Vader's focus narrow. Without it, Vader would be dangerous, not just to the Jedi, but potentially to his master. Still, Palpatine smiled beneath his hood. Challenges were opportunities, and he'd been playing this game far longer than the broken boy kneeling in his shuttle. But before Palpatine's shuttle even left Mustafar's atmosphere, another ship was landing. Senator Bail Organa of Alderaan had watched the security recordings from the Jedi Temple, seen Anakin's slaughter of the younglings, and pieced together what Obi-Wan must have gone to do. When he arrived, he found Obi-Wan barely conscious, his back seared by a lightsaber wound, struggling to reach Padme's ship. Aboard that ship, emergency medical droids worked frantically. Padme had gone into labor, her body shutting down from the trauma. In a desperate surgery, they delivered twins, a boy and a girl, both healthy despite their mother's failing condition. But Padme herself was dying, and no intervention could stop it. Bail made a split-second decision that would shape the future. He took the infant girl, promising Obi-Wan he would raise her as his own on Alderaan. Obi-Wan, clutching the boy, swore to take him to Tatooine, to Anakin's stepfamily where he might be safe from the Empire's reach. They would be hidden in plain sight, separated across the galaxy. Most critically, they wiped the medical droids' memories and destroyed any record of the births. Palpatine would never know these children existed. By the time Vader's shuttle approached Coruscant, Bail's ship was already jumping to hyperspace, carrying Leia Organa to her new home. And Obi-Wan, battered and broken, held Luke Skywalker close as he plotted a course to the Outer Rim. They left Padme behind, knowing she had only hours left, and that moving her might kill her instantly. Palpatine, discovering the aftermath on Mustafar, had Padme transported to Coruscant in a desperate attempt to save her. Or rather, to let Vader witness her final moments and cement his fall. The Emperor always did appreciate poetic cruelty. On Coruscant, in a medical facility few knew existed, Padme Amidala lay in a bed surrounded by the Empire's best medical droids. She was alive, barely. The trauma of force choking, the shock of heartbreak, the physical stress of labor had pushed her to the edge. But she hadn't fallen over it, not yet. Vader entered the room alone, his presence causing the medical droids to pause in their ministrations. Through the Force, he could feel her life signature, once so vibrant, now flickering like a candle in the storm. Her children had already been born, already spirited away, but Vader sensed nothing of them. The Force signatures of newborns were too faint, too undefined. As far as he knew, they died in her womb. "Anakin!" Padme's voice was barely a whisper. Her eyes, once so full of fire and determination, struggled to focus on him. He approached the bed, his expression unreadable. This was the woman he'd betrayed everything for. The woman whose potential death had driven him into Palpatine's arms. She was alive. He'd saved her. But the price... "The Empire will bring peace," he said, his voice hollow. It wasn't an answer to any question she'd asked, but it was the only truth he could offer. "Order. Security. At what cost?" She managed to turn her head to look at him more directly. Even in her weakened state, she saw what he'd become. "Anakin, what have you done?" Through the Force, he felt her life growing fainter. The medical droids had given their prognosis. Her will to live was fading. No machine could repair a broken heart. In the original timeline, this was when she would die. Her last words about there still being good in him echoing into legend. But this Vader was different. He'd chosen to spare Obi-Wan, not from love, but from strategic cruelty. He'd walked away from the flames that were meant to consume him. Now, faced with Padme's fading light, he made another choice. He reached out through the Force, not to save her, but to witness her passing without sentiment. She'd been his anchor to the light, yes, but the light had failed them. The Jedi had failed them. This, the dark side, the Empire, Palpatine's vision. This was the new reality. "You were right about me," he said quietly, as her eyes began to close. "Tell me you love me." She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Not because she didn't want to say them, but because saying them to what he'd become felt like a betrayal of everything she'd stood for. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the steady beep of medical equipment beginning to flatline. Vader stood and walked away before the last monitor went silent. He felt the moment her presence vanished from the Force, not with anguish, but with a cold acknowledgement. Padme Amidala, Senator of Naboo, was dead. The woman who might have redeemed Anakin Skywalker died with the man he used to be. There were no screams, no tortured no that would shake the operating theater. Just the quiet snick of a door closing, and the Dark Lord of the Sith walking toward his new destiny with steady, unburned legs. In the weeks that followed, the Empire solidified its grip on the galaxy with terrifying efficiency. But something had changed in how that power was projected. In the original timeline, Vader became a mysterious figure, his armor iconic, his face hidden, his humanity buried beneath mechanical breathing. He was more myth than man, and that distance made him easier to cope with. He was the boogeyman, the dark enforcer, but he was also clearly more machine than person. This Vader was different. The Imperial propaganda machine, under Palpatine's brilliant guidance, made sure everyone knew who Darth Vader was. Holonet broadcasts showed him, tall, imposing, but undeniably human. His face, scarred by dark side corruption, but recognizably the hero of the Clone Wars. The Empire spun the narrative perfectly. Anakin Skywalker hadn't died. He'd evolved. He'd seen through the Jedi's lies and embraced true order. For citizens of the Empire, it was deeply unsettling. This wasn't some masked monster. This was a man who'd been a hero, and who now hunted his former allies with clinical efficiency. If Anakin Skywalker could fall, could transform into this, then perhaps the Jedi truly had been corrupt. Perhaps the Empire truly was necessary. For surviving Jedi, it was far worse. Obi-Wan Kenobi arrived on Tatooine carrying more than just Luke Skywalker. He carried the weight of complete failure. His physical wounds would heal, more or less. The scar across his back would always pain him, always remind him of his defeat. But the psychological wound ran deeper. He'd left Anakin alive, believing him mortally wounded and soon to die in the flames. But Anakin hadn't burned. He'd walked away whole, and in doing so, had become something Obi-Wan had no framework to comprehend. A Vader without the armor wasn't just dangerous, he was proof that the darkness had won completely. There was no mechanical prison to give hope that the man was still suffering, still potentially redeemable. On Tatooine, hidden in the Junlan wastes, Obi-Wan watched the holonet broadcasts of Vader hunting Jedi across the galaxy. Each report was a knife in his heart. He'd failed as a master, failed as a friend, failed as a Jedi. Yoda, safely hidden on Dagobah, meditated deeply on the implications. Through the Force, he could sense what Obi-Wan could not quite articulate. Vader's survival without consequence had fundamentally altered the timeline. The Force itself seemed uncertain of how to proceed. The Chosen One had not been destroyed by his fall. He'd been perfected by it. "A darker path, this is," Yoda murmured to the mists of his swamp. "Broken, Anakin should have been. Humbled. Instead, vindicated, he feels. Stronger for his choice. Redemption. More difficult now. Perhaps impossible." Obi-Wan and Yoda's few communications in those early years were marked by a disagreement neither wanted to voice openly. Obi-Wan still believed, desperately against all evidence, that Anakin could be saved. Yoda had begun to accept that the Anakin Skywalker they knew was truly dead, and that Darth Vader was something new entirely, a Sith who'd never been broken, never been humbled, never been given reason to question his choice. The high ground had mattered. It had mattered more than either of them had understood in the moment. Meanwhile, Vader's transformation of the Inquisitorius became the stuff of whispered horror among Force-sensitive fugitives. The Inquisitors had existed in the original timeline, but they'd been trained by a Vader limited by his armor, reliant on fear and overwhelming power to compensate for reduced mobility. They'd been effective, but ultimately inferior to their master. This Vader trained them personally, and he was merciless. In a commandeered Jedi Temple training room on Coruscant, Vader faced 3 Inquisitor candidates simultaneously. These were former Jedi who turned to save their lives. Broken, desperate, and now attempting to prove their worth to the Empire. "Your technique is sloppy," Vader said, his voice calm as he parried all 3 of their attacks with minimal movement. "The Jedi taught you forms. I will teach you efficiency." His red blade was a blur. Within seconds, 2 Inquisitors were on the ground, wounds cauterized, but pride shattered. The third, the one who'd lasted longest, panted heavily. "The Jedi," Vader continued, circling her like a predator, "taught you to defend, to preserve life. These teachings are chains. I will break them." The training was brutal. Unlike Palpatine, who preferred psychological torture, Vader pushed his Inquisitors through physical and Force-based trials that would have killed lesser Force sensitives. Many didn't survive. Those who did emerged as fanatics, absolutely loyal, not to the ideology of the Sith, but to Vader himself. They'd seen him move. They'd felt his power. And unlike in the original timeline, where Vader's armor made him seem vulnerable to their potential ambitions, this Vader seemed invincible. They didn't fear him. They worshipped him. This created a new problem for Palpatine. 5 years into the Empire, sitting in his throne room, Palpatine meditated on the shape of his domain. Everything had gone according to plan. The Jedi were virtually extinct. The Senate was a puppet theater. The galaxy bent to his will. And yet, through the Force, he'd begun sensing something troubling. Vader's ambitions, not immediately threatening. Vader was still loyal, still his apprentice. But the foundations were shifting. Without the pain of the armor to keep him focused, without the physical limitations to remind him of his dependence on Palpatine's mercy, Vader was beginning to dream. Palpatine saw it in the way Vader commanded fleets, and how he restructured military hierarchies, in the loyalty he inspired in the Inquisitorius. The apprentice was doing what every successful Sith apprentice must eventually do, preparing to overthrow the master. In the original timeline, this would have been impossible. Vader's armor had seen to that. Oh, Vader might have still harbored ambitions, but the reality of his physical limitations made them fantasy. Palpatine had decades to enjoy his empire, secure in the knowledge that his broken apprentice posed no real threat. Now, Sidious found himself implementing tests, sending Vader on missions with deliberately incomplete intelligence, seeding misinformation among the Inquisitors to see if any would report to Vader before reporting to him. engineering scenarios where Vader might fail, might be reminded of his place. But Vader passed every test, survived every trap, grew stronger with every challenge. The rule of two was reasserting itself ahead of schedule, and Palpatine, for all his power, all his cunning, found himself facing a problem he'd specifically designed the armor to prevent. A Darth Vader at the height of his power, unburdened by physical limitation, and with decades left to plan his ascension. Aboard his flagship in the Outer Rim territories, Vader stood before a viewport overseeing the siege of a small colony world harboring fugitive Jedi. As his forces moved in, he felt something through the Force, a disturbance rippling from a nearby system. Not this world, but close. Tatooine, perhaps? The sensation was fleeting. A presence, young and strong, its signature raw and unfocused, familiar in a way that made something deep in his chest tighten, though he couldn't name why. He reached out through the Force, trying to grasp it, understand it, but the feeling faded as quickly as it had come, swallowed by distance and the Force's mysteries. Probably nothing. The Outer Rim was full of untrained Force sensitives, worthless without proper instruction. He dismissed the disturbance and returned his attention to the operation at hand. But the seed was planted. Years before it should have been, the presence of his son, hidden on Tatooine under Obi-Wan's watchful eye, had brushed against Vader's consciousness through the Force. Not enough to reveal the truth, not enough to even warrant investigation, just enough to echo in the back of his mind, a question mark he couldn't quite resolve. Luke Skywalker, growing up under the binary suns, knew nothing of the Force stirring within him. Owen Lars made sure of that, keeping him far from anything that might draw Imperial attention. But destiny, it seemed, was accelerating. As the years ground on and rebel cells began to coalesce into something resembling an organized resistance, the galaxy that the original trilogy would be set in was fundamentally different from the one we know. In the original timeline, the Death Star was a symbol of the Empire's might, but also of its vulnerability. Its destruction proved that the Empire could be beaten, that even the most powerful weapon had weaknesses. And at the heart of that story was a Vader who was conflicted, who had been broken and rebuilt, who maintained just enough humanity buried under armor to be reached by his son's faith. This timeline offered no such comfort. The Death Star still existed in planning. Palpatine's paranoia and megalomania hadn't changed, but the Empire that would build it was more efficiently brutal, its Jedi hunters more capable, and its enforcer. Darth Vader stood on the bridge of his flagship, gazing out at the stars. No respirator marked his breathing. No mechanical limbs limited his movement. He looked almost human, until you saw his eyes. The corruption staining his features. The casual cruelty with which he force-choked incompetent officers. This was a Vader who had never been humbled by the flames of Mustafar. A Vader who'd made his choice deliberately, watched his wife die without wavering, and spent years perfecting his craft as a Sith Lord without the hindrance of prosthetics and pain. A Vader who trained an army of Inquisitors in his own image, and whose growing power made even the Emperor wary. When the time came, and it would come, for a son to face his father, for hope to challenge tyranny, the odds would be so much worse. Luke Skywalker would stand before a Darth Vader who didn't wheeze with every breath, who moved with the full agility of a trained Jedi Knight enhanced by dark side power. A Vader whose only scars were the ones he chose to bear, and whose physical wholeness reflected a psychological commitment to the dark side that had never been tested by consequence. Was Anakin's physical destruction the only thing that ultimately allowed his redemption? On Dagobah, Yoda contemplated this question as he neared the end of his life. In another timeline, he would train Luke with the certainty that there was still good in Vader, still a man beneath the machine. In this timeline, that certainty was gone. Vader had never been imprisoned by his armor. He'd never been given a reason to question whether his choices had been worth the cost. He was powerful, purposeful, and pure in his commitment to darkness. And somewhere on Tatooine, a boy named Luke stared up at the twin suns, dreaming of adventure, unaware that his destiny would require him to redeem not a broken father, but a triumphant one. The galaxy held its breath, waiting for a new hope that would need to burn so much brighter to penetrate the darkness that had been allowed to flourish unbroken, unchallenged, unrepentant. Because sometimes, armor isn't what imprisons a man. Sometimes, it's the last thing keeping him human. If you enjoyed this journey into an alternative Star Wars universe where destiny takes unexpected turns and balance means something entirely different, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We explore the infinite possibilities hidden within the galaxy far, far away, asking the questions that reshape everything you thought you knew. The Force has many paths. Come discover them with us.